Audio is working. Right. So really when we hear the word Mikhail Tal and the game, yeah, the most common thing that you'll see in this game is like, oh no, my rook, oh no, my queen, and after a while, this the game just becomes impossible to understand because so many pieces are just hanging over the place and what the hell is going on, right? But he does have some games where he actually plays normally, especially during his later years in the 1980s. And today we will be looking at one of his games as part of our isolated pawn series. So in this game, he's taking the black pieces and you will see how he does makes playing with the isolated pawns seem like such an easy task. Right, so here goes. E4, knight f6, knight c3, c5, yes, symmetrical English. Right, don't guess the yellow, next time. c5, okay, so everything is. And now we see a very, the moment where you see d, like this is e3, d4, c5, you know an isolated pawn position is going to come on the board, almost certainly, right? And here, what really does grants black his wishes. You take here and you put the bishop on the most ideal square, right? Very common also for the side play against the isolated pawn. Your b2, you're taking control over the square, especially since e3 has already been played, so the bishop really there's no future over here. Unless he somehow can get e4 in, which is not so realistic. e6, b2, queen d6, into c1, okay, very reasonable. The isolated pawn gives you some of these opportunities. And bishop to a7, so just getting out of the rook's line of fire. e1, rook to e8, a3 here by white. And so you can see what's the rough idea. You don't really want one of black's pieces to end up here, and you possibly want to play b4 later on. But in my opinion, this is quite a slow plan, because eventually black is going to get out his bishop. It's going to, black's plan is very clear. After you develop all your pieces for black, he's going to just go for d4 and push up and blow open the whole position. So white needs to find a way to try and play against this and ensure that black doesn't have sufficient time to get his plans through. And I feel that any plan that comes with a3 is going to be a bit too slow. What I would recommend here would be something like knight to d4. So let's say for example after knight is, usually when you are playing against the isolated pawn, you want to trade off some of your opponent's pieces so that in the end game the isolated pawn becomes a bit more vulnerable, right? Yep. So over here, knight takes d4, e takes d4, and even though over here you see that white gets their own isolated pawn, but it's very much available for white actually. Over here you notice that black will have some trouble trying to develop this light square bishop. Where is he going to place it? Possibly bishop f4, bishop e6, trying to support this pawn. And on the other hand, I think white does have quite a lot of options at their disposal. Bishop f3 comes to mind. Just trying to put pressure on this pawn. This pawn really isn't a target. Eventually, white might even consider knight a4, knight c5, right? And actually, their rooks are much better placed to exploit the open files as compared to black. I think this knight b4 plan is definitely worth considering for white. But instead, white goes a3. So game continues on, bishop to g4. Now black is able to get out with this spin threat over here, and rook a d8 is going to come out very soon. And white goes bishop stop rook c2. So the idea is that you want to get onto this file to try and put some pressure on the pawn. But again, I already said that a3, rook c2 is going to be quite a slow plan as compared to black's ideas of push rook a8 and d4. So here goes rook a8, rook d2. And at first glance, it might seem that, yeah, I know, d4 might be a bit scary because the rook is eyeing down on the black queen. So if you want to play d4, you really have to calculate very carefully. But it turns out that Mikhail Tal did actually calculate very carefully and realized that he can already play d4 over here. Maybe because his pieces are already in such good positions. Like, look at this, the bishop is already ideally situated on this diagonal, so that after any trade along this, the diagonal will be, like this king will be wide open. These rooks are also very ideally placed along the files that are going to be opened very soon. This knight is really isn't doing much. His bishop is exerting a lot of pressure here. The knights can come in, and that's why Mikhail Tal decided that e4 is d4 is really the right moment to play this now. Knight takes d4. E takes d4 is playable as well, and after knight takes d4, actually we get to a position in the main line, so I'm not gonna go through this. White can also consider going, thus rejecting the offer altogether with knight to b1, but actually this loses for white, because see what happens after this. By the way, this was not played in the actual game, but let's see what happens. Bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, and now see you just casually ignore this this attack on the queen because the pressure along this file is just so strong, right? So let's say, for example, after rook takes d6, pretty obvious, right? E takes f2. I already take it. A lot of pressure on this diagonal, and this is going to fall, and white is going to lose. So rook takes d6, also playable. F takes e3 is what happens after this. I can just play rook takes e3. And again, the diagonal is going to be open. This is going to fall, this is going to fall, yeah, and the queen is immune. But rook takes e3 not playable. Rook takes e3 is an interesting try, right? But again, it loses to this. Rook takes e3. And again, if you take, then there's a very large weakness on this back rank. So let's say if one is stupid enough to recapture, you get mated, right? If he doesn't, play something like f takes e3, it does take. Again, and yeah, you win the rook. Yeah, so you notice again, I keep repeatedly talking about this pressure along this diagonal, and that's why this d4 move is so powerful, because it just unlocks a lot of possibilities along this diagonal over here. And that is why this bishop is really excellently placed to exploit a isolated pawn break, right? Especially since it's staring right down at these key squares in the enemy position. Alright, so d4 played here, knight b1 wasn't played. Instead, in the actual game, white went for knight takes d4, and knight takes d4, e takes d4. Now, if white goes for bishop takes g4, then we are going to see a position where the pressure along this open files actually work in black's favor. So let's say, for example, after knight takes g4, queen takes g4, we have knight f3 check. And you see, because black has placed this rook here, you're going to be able to win this. Right, basically you're an exchange up. Yeah, so bishop takes g4 wasn't played, pawn takes instead, and now bishop takes. Now yeah, again there's a lot of pressure here. After bishop takes, rook takes, queen takes, knight takes. Effectively over here, black is just winning. Right? I'm gonna stop this. Or yeah, you can play this, then how are you gonna stop this? Right? Too many threats against white's king. So I think by this stage, black is just completely won. And yeah, knight sorry, knight to e4, just trying to stop it, but actually over here, yeah, here onwards, black just starts pawn grabbing, and yeah, And yeah, and at this position, white resigns. Because his pin is going to fall. I think white probably has to take, and then after this, they're still going to win the rook, trade off and simplify everything, and yeah, black will win this endgame because he have won so many pawns. So yeah, interesting game, and I think really the critical moment of the game was, I'll just go back to that position. Yeah, over here. See, maybe because black's pieces were just so well placed in their optimal positions, with the rooks in the with the rooks in the center ready to exploit this open files, the bishop ready to exploit this diagonal with the knights, the other bishops so excellently placed as compared to white's pieces over here. I think that's why Mikhail Tal was able to get through this d5 d4 pawn break and win the game eventually. So yeah, he makes the concept of playing with the isolated pawn look so easy. And yeah, I hope you all learn quite a bit from this game. Right, and that's it for me today. Thanks for watching.